Hello, birth warriors. Welcome to another episode of the Preparing for Pregnancy After Loss podcast. This is your host, Natalie Facey. Welcome back. If you've been with us for a while and if you are new, welcome to the tribe. Welcome to the Birth Warrior Tribe. So, I have a wonderful episode lined up for you today. And this is a session that I led inside of the Birth Warrior community when we had a Birth Warrior community on Facebook. Now the community exists on Instagram. We stay in touch via the newsletter. We're no longer in Facebook, but we're still keeping the energy of the tribe alive. So in this particular session, I spoke about the mind-body connection and how there have been scientific studies that show the link between the mind and the body in pregnancy and childbirth. And in particular, how unhealed emotions in the body can complicate childbirth or complicate the pregnancy process. So I'm really excited to be able to share it with you because up until now, this is something that existed in the community for those who joined the community inside of Facebook. But now that we have spread our wings outside of the gates of Facebook, I want to make sure that there are more members of the tribe who have access to it because this is really important stuff. Okay, so without further ado, here is the episode. I'm going to be talking about risk factors that can cause complications in childbirth. It's interesting because I work with people along the entire birthing spectrum, right? So when someone is having challenges becoming pregnant, I work with them at that stage. When someone is pregnant and they need support, emotional healing support or coaching during pregnancy, I work with them at that stage. During pregnancy or during childbirth, I'm also a birth doula. And if it so happens that someone has a loss, which we're all familiar with that's why we're here, I work with people at that stage in the midst of having a loss and after the loss to support their healing. So I get to see so much of what happens along the birth spectrum. And if I didn't see so much of it, I wouldn't have thought that this particular topic is an important one. But because I see so much of it and because it keeps coming up, I know how important this topic is, right? So the complications or the risk factors that I'm going to be sharing that could cause complications, it isn't the physical things like, no smoking and don't drink alcohol. Like it's not like we all know those things. It's sort of the things under the surface that are deeply seeped into our being, deeply seeped into how we operate that we don't know is actually affecting us. This is the book that I'm going to be picking up. Okay, here we are. So this book is called Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. It's by Dr. Christian Northrup, who has been an OBGYN for definitely more than 30 years now. But she also teaches and speaks a lot about the mind-body connection because there is no separation between the mind and the body, right? If there is something that is causing you mental stress in your life, that stress begins to show up in your body. If you are in love, for example, there is physical sensation, physical stuff that are happening in your body. So we know this. This is like everyday life for us. But I think when we think of trauma and loss and going through something really difficult, we tend to separate the mind and the body, and it's always connected. So there is a section in this book on how women live is how they give birth. I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from that section, and I'm going to keep pausing in between because some of it might be new for you and some of it might take some time to digest. My intention is never to create emotional distress for you. But what I have seen as a doula working with people as they're giving birth is that all of the stuff from before that wasn't resolved, it comes to a climax when you're giving birth, and it tends to create challenges in the birthing experience, right? So it could be that labor is stalling because there is tension in your body. And what creates tension in the body? It's fear. It's being uncertain about certain things, or being afraid of what happens after you give birth when the baby is no longer inside of you but is its own person in its own body. So know that all of the information that I'm sharing here, it is to empower you so that when you know it consciously, you have choice. When you know it consciously, it doesn't feel as though you are in the birthing room or wherever you're giving birth. It doesn't feel as though you're in the midst of giving birth and in a state of panic because there's so much that you didn't have a chance to deal with and process. Okay, so if you have this book, I'm on page 473, and this section is about the fact that how women um, labor, it's how they live, or how they live, it's how they end up laboring. So I'm picking out just a couple of excerpts, right? And then I'll go through the risk factors so that you know what those are. All right, so this first one, and this is Christian Northup writing. She says, I've learned that a woman's entire life leads up to what will happen in labor. Studies have shown that women with prolonged labors have certain personality characteristics. They have inner conflicts about reproduction and motherhood and are unable at the time of the labor to communicate and admit their anxieties. So what she's saying here, whenever there is, whenever the doctor says like your labor isn't progressing, meaning the baby isn't descending or you're not dilating as much as they would want you to dilate, it's because within you there is inner conflict and you aren't able to communicate those, or you have a habit of not communicating your needs. So she goes into studies of what happens in the reproductive experience, not just giving birth. She talks about all sorts of things like endometriosis, PCOS, all sorts of conditions relating to our reproduction and what that is linked to. I love that she's incorporating both the scientific perspective, like actual studies, and also things from a mind-body perspective. Okay, so we talked about inner conflicts and how that can actually complicate labor, and I have observed that. Like I have lived through that and supporting a client when her labor stalled or when she didn't want to push because of the inner conflict that she had. And what I know for sure is that it is much more helpful, much more effective and convenient when the conflicts are resolved before you're actually in the birthing room, before you're actually giving birth. However, if you're not even pregnant yet, it means that you have even more time to resolve anything that's there, right? Even more time. So this is relevant whatever category you're in. All right, so still on the same page, another excerpt. Women who have experienced incest or other abuse are prime candidates for dysfunctional labors and subsequent cesarean section unless they work through this, which is certainly possible. Many of these women, and as she's saying women, think of this as women and birthing people. So many of the where am I? Many of the birthing people have learned of those birthing people who have gone through abuse or incest, have learned at a deep level how to be victims. This plays out in childbirth, a time when instead of being victims, they actually need to be one with their body and one with the process. Right? So I'm like, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking of just going through trauma in general, because just going through something traumatic, you might feel as though life has defeated you. You might feel as though, you're at the mercy of life, like things are happening that are outside of your control. So even if it isn't something like sexual assault or sexual abuse that you've gone through, going through something traumatic such as a loss, such as infertility, might give you this sense as though you do not have control over what happens. So instead of being one with your body and really being present to the experience, you might fall into this place of being a victim. Okay. So another excerpt, and this one, I see this one very often, and I definitely feel as though I lived this one. So other survivors of abuse, however, use control as a survival mechanism. So that was definitely me, using control. During pregnancy, these women or birthing people often come into a doctor's office with a long list of demands. No IVs, no monitor, no medical students, etc. Many obstetricians sense that these women are birthing people who need to control the birth process the most, are often the ones who end up with the most interventions. So the ones who want to control it the most usually end up with the most interventions. Any birth attendant will tell you that the longer the laundry list, the greater the chance of an unplanned intervention, such as a C-section. The reason is that the list is often a symptom of a woman's or birthing person's illusion of intellectual control. And I'm telling you that I lived this. Her attempt to manage a situation about which she feels completely terrorized and out of control. By trying to control all the variables associated with the birthing process, she thinks she can somehow avoid the terror that she associates with her body, with feeling her body in general, and with the birth process. The more a woman operates from this illusion of control, the less likely she will be to surrender to her body's process, and the more likely that an intervention will be necessary. I want to make sure that wherever you are on your journey, you have as much information as possible, because I've seen this so often that it's important to address right now and not when you're in the labor and delivery room, right? All right, the final excerpt, and then we'll go into the risk factors. Gail Peterson, in her book Birthing Normally, points out that women labor in the same way they live. Labor is a crisis situation for most women, and we also know that because of how childbirth and labor is presented on TV. Okay, labor is a crisis situation for most women. They approach it the way they approach any crisis. Some believe that they are powerless, while others try to assume control. A study of the differences between women who had chosen to induce labor and those who had chosen to let labor come spontaneously showed that those who chose induction lacked trust in their own reproductive systems. They were more likely to complain during their menstrual periods, had more complications in their obstetrical history, and had more anxiety going into labor. Gail Peterson and Louis Mel Madrona did a study of pregnant women in which they were able to predict with 95% accuracy which of them would get into trouble during labor based on the criteria in the next table, and I'll walk you through those criteria. And those studies have been supported by many individual studies on complications in pregnancy. So I wanted to start with the science, right? And this is the book again, if anyone wants to check it out. It is very thick and I love it because I can always use it as a reference as I'm working with clients and as we're going through different topics. And I use it as I'm sharing content that's going to be helpful for the birthing journey or the birth work journey. So the one caveat that I would say is obviously they're not speaking specifically about women or birthing people who've gone through a loss, but a lot of these things can apply, right? So they mentioned for people who have experienced like sexual assault or incest or, you know, some form of abuse. I would say that the feeling inside after going through something traumatic, such as a sense of helplessness, it's very similar, right? So I want to pause there because I feel like that was a lot. Let's just pause and take a breath. And I know that as I'm sharing this, you might be thinking of your previous birth experience. Like when I was coming across a lot of this content, well, firstly, the reason why I started diving into this content, it's because I wanted answers from my own journey, but I also wanted to be able to prepare myself, mind, body, and spirit for my next pregnancy, right? So all of what I'm sharing, I'm also sharing with my clients. And I know that it might sometimes feel challenging to, you know, think that, you know, there are things that could complicate your pregnancy, but I want you to use that as power, like allow this information to empower you. And I would definitely discourage you from going back to your previous birth experience and finding any reason to blame yourself, because there is so much that is sometimes outside of our control, right? So that whatever doctor or OB you were working with at the time, you know, they might have summed that we don't know what happened, right? But that was the result of that pregnancy. That was the result of that journey. And we don't know why it happened. Even though much of what happened in the past was out of our control, I want to empower you with as much information as possible so that when next you're going on that journey of becoming pregnant again, and if you're pregnant right now, as you're on that journey, you know as much as you need to know so that you're in a balanced place, mind, body, and spirit, right? So, what this is saying, and I'll summarize in my own words, well, also in theirs, but how we live, it's also how we give birth. Why that is so important is because after going through something traumatic, that changes how you live, right? And so obviously there are different ways that can manifest. In some cases, we are constricted, we are tight, we are fearful. It feels as though it's hard to take a breath because we're wondering what might happen next, right? In other cases, there is so much fear about even trying again. There's fear about trying again because um, the thought of potentially having another loss, right? And even when you've successfully become pregnant, there is the constant terror that you're going to lose your baby, the constant terror that what happened the first time is going to happen again. So there is fear all throughout the journey. And we respond to that fear, we respond to going through that trauma in a couple of different ways. You know, so they've talked about fight, flight, freeze as being the survival responses. What they mentioned in the book is really two contrasting states of being. So either being completely passive and pulling yourself out of the situation, disengaging from the pregnancy, right? So that could be one. Or the fight response is wanting to control everything. And I know for sure that in my second pregnancy, I was in the fight response. At different points, I had different responses, but I was definitely in the fight response. I was researching everything. When I went in for, I was in the hospital because what was happening? my cervix started opening. And so they were observing me. And as they were doing different things, I kept saying, no, I don't want that because like that does this. Like I had all the rules, I had researched all the things. And I was like Miss Boss Lady inside of the observation room. And so that was me wanting to control the situation because I was terrified of another loss. I was so fearful that something terrible would happen again. And so instead of being passive and completely disengaged, I was at the other end of that, trying to control everything, right? No, those are the responses that feel most appropriate, right? It's the thing that you have to do to feel as though you can survive a situation that is really painful. So whether you have detached completely, that's the response that feels the safest. And if you're like in the driver's seat, taking control and telling everyone what they need to do, it's because that helps you to feel safe. Wherever you are, it's your safety response. It's what supports you in feeling safe again. So don't judge yourself if you're noticing any of those things, right? What I want you to be aware of, though, is the reason why those safety responses are showing up. It's because you feel unsafe. And that sense of unsafety that shows up when you're about to give birth. So it might show up in the form of, actually, it might show up even during the pregnancy. So you might be having complications in the pregnancy. You might be feeling a lot of physical discomfort in the pregnancy. And that's your physical body responding to what's happening emotionally, right? If there's a lot of anxiety and fear, you're releasing those chemicals, you're releasing that cortisol into your body. So everything is connected. The mind and the body, there is no like, we're not cut off at the head. We're entire systems or entire integrated beings, right? So in the pregnancy, you might be having complications, challenges, discomfort, right? Moving into actually giving birth, you might have challenges there as well. So, I mentioned before, like labor stalling or labor not progressing. So when that happens, it's when the baby isn't descending. It's when your cervix isn't opening, you're not dilating enough. And the medical team might worry that the baby might be at risk, depending on how long this has been happening for. And usually, when labor isn't progressing, it's when the birthing person isn't able to surrender to the process, isn't able to move with the process, doesn't feel safe in the process, right? So before we talked about the inner conflict, so the fears inside that haven't been resolved. If you've gone through the terrible experience of losing a baby, of course there's fear. If that hasn't been resolved, if that hasn't been dealt with, of course it's going to rear its ugly head the next time you're giving birth or in your next pregnancy, right? So if you've been listening to my podcast for a while, you know that this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, just like healing in general. So what I consider to be my work is not just supporting you in getting pregnant, not just supporting your body to be balanced or to be in an optimal state to become pregnant, but your holistic healing. Like you as a person feeling healed and strong and confident and excited about taking on life again. Because this is an experience that touches you. And if it touches you so that you feel broken or afraid or hesitant or closed in, if you feel as though every single day you're like at your emotional capacity, so that if one more thing happens, you're just going to lose it. If that's what's happening, it means that there's healing that needs to be done. Okay? So there's a whole list of risk factors that they have, and I can go through all of them. Do not want you to be overwhelmed by them, but I do want to share what they are. Some of them might apply, some might not. Don't feel offended by any of this if it is that you're in any of these categories. I have a book on like what's happening in your body physically and how that's linked to emotional stuff. That's somewhere there. It also has scientific studies, which is why I love it. But I feel like when I read that book, I'm like, what did you just say about me? Like I take offense that someone just like discovered something that I didn't know was there. But then I get to look into that thing, right? I get to look into what's that thing that's happening on an emotional level that's affecting my body physically. So use this information as power, right? So in this table, they have the potential risk factors in childbirth. This is probably, I don't know, 15 to 20 of them. So they have the risk factors that they have seen over and over again that lead to high risk childbirth, meaning a high risk of complications when you're giving birth. And on the other side, they have the low risk. So I'm going to share the high risk because obviously whatever is on the high risk side, it's the opposite of that. That leads to a low risk of complication. The first one here is passivity. So being passive in the pregnancy or in the childbirth experience. What that might look like is not expressing your needs, not having opinions on anything, just allowing the team around you to decide for you. Dependence is the next one. So similar to passivity, but depending on others to make the choices to do everything. The next one here is reliance on others. So these are all connected: passivity, dependence, reliance on others. And then the next one is an inability to accept support from others. That one there definitely struck a chord with me, because if you were raised as a strong, independent woman, then this inability to accept help, it does show up. Okay. So that was a big one for me. The next one here is rejection of womanhood and repressed sexuality, self-view as a sexual object. And those are all linked to sexuality, womanhood. And if you remember what I mentioned before about experience sexual assault or any form of any abuse on your sexuality or on your womanhood or on your personhood, then that impacts how you view yourself, right? That impacts your relationship with your body. And if that impacts your relationship with your body and how you view yourself, then that shows up in your pregnancy. It shows up at every single appointment where you have to be checked by the doctor. It shows up when you're giving birth, and I would say the childbirth experience, it definitely requires freedom in your body. It definitely requires trust in your body. It definitely requires an ability for your body to let go and to be free and to feel safe in that. And if you haven't felt safe in your body, if you don't have a strong relationship with your body, then that restriction is going to show up when you're giving birth. Okay. This next one is being childlike. And I would say it's like not being adult-like not being able to take control and make decisions from this place of being in your sovereignty, being in your personhood, and being clear that this is the right decision that you're making as an adult. The next one is limiting beliefs about birth. So that could be that birth has to be painful or that it has to be traumatic. And I would say that the media is definitely responsible for this perception, because that's what we see all the time, right? Birth that is painful, traumatic, and difficult. Just as I'm on this point, one documentary that I recommend to my doula clients all the time is a documentary called Orgasmic Birth. And it is exactly what it sounds like, an orgasmic birth in the literal sense. But even from a more general perspective, It shows that birth can be gentle, and it shows that by really tuning into your body and connecting with your body, birth can be an orgasmic and pleasurable experience, right? So, I highly recommend that if the only thing that you've seen is like a traumatic birth of people yelling and it being like a really difficult experience. And then in your own birth experience, that might have been traumatic, right? So it means that not only do you observe a traumatic birth out into the world, but your expectation is that it will be traumatic. So having this different perspective might be something that's healing for you. And again, the name of that movie is Orgasmic Birth. I think it's available on Amazon for like a $2.99 rental or something. It's not that expensive, so definitely check it out. Okay, so the next point here is non-conducive prior acculturation. Someone who is dishonest or manipulative in their communication, spiritual beliefs that interfere with birth, a self-image of weakness. That's a big one. If again, that's linked to feeling like a victim. So if you feel as though it is bound, like it is destined for this situation to overpower you or for you to not be able to really meet the situation face to face. A split of mind and body, meaning you don't actually consider that your mind and body has a connection. So when there's something physical showing up in your body, you disregard it because there is no, not you, I hate saying you, the people in here, not you, right? So when something shows up in the body, the birthing person disregards it because there isn't the understanding that the mind and the body is connected. Your emotions and your body are connected. uh, Conflictual relationships. So having relationships, it could be with your partner, but it could be with other family members and friends that have conflicts. Um, Departures from the birth plan. So you have a birth plan and something has to change, but you actually don't have flexibility for that thing changing. Fear not being worked through, being sedentary, having a frail body appearance. And I love that they put appearance. And again, this is linked to the emotional and the physical connection, right? So, what's happening from an emotional and mental standpoint, it will manifest in your body. So, when you see someone and they look completely exhausted, it doesn't have to be that they're physically exhausted, they could be mentally exhausted. But you can actually see in their appearance that something is off, that something isn't balanced. So here they're saying if the person's body appears to be frail, and in your mind's eye, you can see what someone's body looks like when they appear to be frail, right? So imagine what must be happening from an emotional or mental standpoint, or it could be from a physical standpoint for that person to appear to be frail. Rigid in resisting change and new ideas, a chaotic home, does not want the child, external control of own life, denial of the reality of the birth plan. So there's so many. We're not going to be able to dive into each of them right now. The last one that just came up that I want to touch on a little bit is not wanting the child. And in this book, there's like another section that goes into that on how when uh, women and birthing people have conflict, like an inner conflict around having a child, that can lead to complications. Now, I'm going to reconnect that back to what I call the birth warrior journey, meaning you've gone through a loss, you've gone through infertility. Now, if you've had a loss or challenges on the pregnancy journey before, and you're pregnant again, you for sure want the child, right? You want the child. You want to be a parent. Where the conflict comes in is the worry or the fear that in the process of becoming pregnant, you might have another loss. So that's the conflict, right? So, on the one hand, yes, I want this child. I intentionally conceived so that I could have this child, or whether or not you didn't, but like you want the child, right? And on the other hand, it's like, okay, with becoming pregnant, it's also the risk of losing the child, right? So that's the conflict. that keeps hitting up on each other. And with that conflict, that can complicate pregnancy, right? We won't be able to dive into the depths of all of this. But what I want you to remember from this book, from the excerpts that I shared, is that what's happening from an emotional perspective, from a mental perspective, it's going to impact your body physically, or it could be impacting your body physically. Like, you know, the difference between when you're happy and the energy that you feel in your body, or the softness, or when you're stressed and the tightness and the constriction that you feel in your body, or when you're tired and how depleted your body feels. So that is a mental or emotional experience that expresses itself physically. The same thing happens when you're trying to conceive. You know, when they tell you, oh, just relax and you'll get pregnant, like, that's why they say that. But it isn't just relax and you'll get pregnant, because it's not, you know, taking a bath or lighting candles. It's the chemicals and the hormones that are in your system, from your system being traumatized and your system holding that trauma, right? It's like emotional stress. It's not physical stress from what you're doing at work or, you know, trying to lift something. It's the emotional stress that you're carrying in your body every day, because what happened before, the loss, the pain, the hurt, that hasn't been resolved yet, right? So it shows up when you're trying to conceive. It shows up when you're pregnant, for sure, because the majority of the people that I'm working with right now, they're currently pregnant. And there's a lot of mental and emotional stuff that's happening, which luckily we're able to resolve all of that before they go into giving birth, right? And when you're in the birthing room, if those things aren't resolved, then they show up. They show up. The other thing that I didn't read, and this is from Ina May Gaskin, who's a well-known midwife and has written a ton of books on supporting women and birthing people to give birth from almost like from the inside out, from understanding their bodies. Not this very mechanical thing, but understanding what their bodies are doing and how to support their body's process. The heading for this particular piece is called "The Cervix is a Spinster." So midwife Anna Mae Gaskin coined the term spinster law to explain why so many women's labors stop progressing the minute they get to the hospital, and why so many experience failure to progress and end up with interventions. The reason is that the cervix is a spinster, just like the ones that control urination and elimination. That means that the cervix can open and close. It's not just like you're progressing, opening, and like that's how it has to go. The cervix can actually retract and start closing based on the stress or the fear that you start feeling in your body. It's impossible to let go and relax a spinster unless you feel totally relaxed and safe. That's why so many people get constipated when they travel. Yeah, that makes sense too. So if you've ever traveled or gone into a new space and you became constipated, it's because of the response in your body to stress. So if you don't feel safe, if you feel stressed, your body is going to tighten and contract. And when you feel safe, your body opens up. Your baby is able to move down more freely. Your cervix starts to dilate more easily because you feel safe. So safety can be created in the external environment. So they mentioned that by the time women and birthing people arrive at the hospital, they stop progressing because they're in a new environment now. They don't feel as safe again. There are strangers around them now. They have to take in everything that's happening before they can allow their body to really let go, to really surrender to the process, to really be present to the process, right? And the same thing happens internally. So there's the external environment that creates safety, and there's the internal environment right now that you have control over that can create safety. So if inside of you there is fear around becoming pregnant, around giving birth, around having a loss, then that sense of unsafety, that fear, is creating complications, or it could potentially create complications, right? So hopefully this was helpful. I know that this was a lot. It's also the reason why I don't go into these topics as often as I do. So if I'm working with a client and it comes up, we get to dive in, we get to go in and really look at the situation. But I feel like it's valuable now because I'm seeing it in the birthing room. And if you know right now, then you can do something about it, right? The solution is really working to do the healing. Something that I've been talking about for the past couple of weeks is that healing gets to be ongoing, right? So obviously the thing that you've gone through is so difficult, right? It was so painful. But I think of healing as sort of like a math equation, right? So this is like a lot of pain, and the pain is like really heavy. So if you think of it as a scale, the pain is like all the way down here because you've gone through so much of it. When you start adding experiences that heal you more and more over time, then the pain becomes less because you're healing. So it's okay if healing is ongoing. It's okay if right now you're still hurting. Of course, you're still hurting. You went through something terrible. So, really, the answer is to work on your healing. It's to work on your healing. And there are different ways that you can work on your healing. One of the things that I do with my clients is I help them to understand what their body's signature is. Like, what's the thing that most resonates with them, right? You might have heard people say that talk therapy was amazing for them, and that's wonderful. For some people, talk therapy does nothing, right? So it's understanding what's the language of your body and what's the process that you need to heal. And you might already know this. So some of you, it might be reading, it might be through art, it might be journaling, it might be being out in nature, it might be being in community like this one and having conversations within groups. Your body heals in different ways based on your unique body signature. So begin to tune into what are the things that give you pleasure? What are the things that give you joy? And intentionally create space for that, because that's going to help you to heal. As there is worry and fear that is constantly moving through your mind about what happened or what might happen, as there is anxiety about the future, you get to balance that out by creating joyful experiences and by intentionally creating space for your healing. So that's something that you already have access to, that you can already do. Now, the next level of that is working with a professional, right? You can work with a therapist. Therapy is wonderful because it gives you space just to yourself to process what has happened on a mental level, to be able to talk to someone who isn't holding judgment towards you, who isn't your partner. You know, like if you wanted to say something about your partner that you feared that your partner would, you know, take offense with. Like you get to talk about those things in a therapy session. So therapy is helpful. The limitations that I found with therapy is that you're just talking. So everything is happening on a mental level. When it comes to emotional healing, talking isn't the most effective way to do that, right? What I practice is a form of therapy called somatic therapy or somatic healing. Somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means body. So it's therapy that incorporates the body. It's therapy that supports you in mapping where you're actually holding emotions. So are you holding tightness in your chest area? Have you been finding it hard to breathe? Are you holding heaviness in your shoulders? Have you been experiencing a lot of back pain? Like all of these things are ways that your body communicates with you. It's your body saying, we're holding on to some emotional stuff right now. We're holding on to some physical stuff right now, some mental stuff right now. Something needs to be resolved. Something needs to be released. And so in my practice, that's what we work through. and in noticing what the body is holding, in noticing where these emotions and physical sensations are showing up, that's basically an entryway for healing, right? Because if your shoulders are saying, we're holding on to a lot, we're taking on the world right now. If your throat is, or yeah, if your throat is saying, we haven't been able to express our voice, we haven't been able to say how we really feel about what's happening. If your chest has been saying, I'm holding on to so much grief, there is so much pain that I'm holding on to, there is so much of my love that has been lost, right? Your body talks to you, your body communicates with you. And so as I work with clients, it's mapping where is the body already communicating with you and supporting clients to heal in that way. And then what I connect that to, of course, is whatever goals clients have for the rest of their journey. And so if your goal is to prepare yourself to become pregnant, if your goal is to work through all of the fears so that you actually feel ready emotionally and mentally to become pregnant, then we work towards that goal. If you're currently pregnant and you're like, oh shit, I feel like I am losing it. Every single day I'm waking up and it feels like a blessing that I'm still pregnant and that nothing is wrong. It's like whatever happens, I am in complete panic because I don't know, as one of my clients said, when the other shoe will fall. I don't know what's going to happen that will take all of this away from me. So I support you in getting to a place of ease. I support you in working through the fear so that you can actually have a joyful pregnancy. Like, wouldn't that be amazing to actually have a pregnancy like the first one that you had? To actually have a pregnancy where you are excited about meeting your baby. Like, I know this experience so well, right? So I'm going to obviously make myself available for connecting with you so that wherever you are on your journey, you have support for the next step, whether you're focused on your healing, whether you're planning to conceive, whether you're actively trying, whether you're pregnant right now, wherever you are, you have that support. By the time you're ready to try again, by the time you're ready to bring your baby into the world, you're doing it without fear. You're doing it with confidence, and you're doing it knowing that you have support, that someone has your back. This week has been especially active, so definitely grab a time. This week, there are already some sessions and consults that I have next week. I think people are starting to get in the mood of, I don't know, like taking action. I don't know if it's the sun that's coming out, but people are starting to book more. So definitely book a time so that we can chat as soon as possible. Yeah, I think it's like a pity that doctors don't talk about it enough, because in my second pregnancy, there was no mention about the stress that I was experiencing. I remember asking my high risk doctor why my cervix was shortening again, like what was happening, why my cervix was shortening. When it's time for you to give birth, then the cervix starts to become shorter and shorter, and then it starts to dilate, to open up, and your baby comes through that, right? So my cervix was starting to open up way before it should have. And I remember asking my high risk doctor as they were monitoring me, why is this happening? And her response was, that's how your body works. And I was shocked, like shooked. I was like, my body doesn't work that way. It isn't working. In fact, like that isn't what my body should be doing. And there was no head nod to the fact that the stress and the internal terror that I was in could have been having an impact on my body. And I think that's the piece that's missing, where within the conventional medical system, there are all these interventions that are sometimes necessary, sometimes helpful. But even in the midst of the interventions, if what's at the source isn't dealt with, then you're still going to end up with challenges. So I had a cerclage, meaning, so this was the cervix. So they stretched the cervix as it was starting to shorten. They stretched it and then they tied it up so that it would not continue shrinking. And of course, it was continuing to shrink, right? It was continuing to shrink, but the cerclage, the procedure that was done, um, shortened the time in which that happened. So I still gave birth prematurely. My son was 23 weeks and I think 4 days or 5 days when I gave birth, and he was so premature that he didn't make it, right? And if someone was supporting me with my mental and emotional healing, that reality could have been very, very different. So that's why I'm so passionate about this work. I remember someone that I was having a call with, she said, "Isn't it difficult to talk about this stuff?" And my response was, no, it would be difficult if I didn't talk about it. Because if I have information and I'm not sharing it and it can be helpful, then it's like, why would I do that? Like, why would I withhold information that I know can be helpful to someone? So even though, some of this information can be triggering, even though it might be uncomfortable to hear some of it, at the end of the day, I want you to feel empowered because you can actually do something, right? If you feel like you fell into the category of being passive, you can actually do something. I definitely fell into the category of like, I'm controlling all the things. Everyone needs to do what I say so that exactly what I want to happen is what happens in this pregnancy, right? So if you fall into that category, then you know where that's coming from, where the need to control is coming from. And the healing has to happen within so that that trauma response, that survival response doesn't need to be there anymore, because it's there because you feel unsafe. So when you feel safe, when you feel supported, then you don't have to have that response anymore. And that's where the healing happens. That's the root of all of it. So some of the takeaways are, as I would say, the first one is begin to become aware of how this shows up in your body. Begin to become aware of what your trauma responses are, right? Are you being passive? Are you allowing someone else to make all the decisions because you're at your emotional capacity and it doesn't feel as though you can take anything on? Are you disengaging from pregnancy and thinking about the baby or thinking about the loss? Whatever is happening, it means that healing, emotional healing, is going to support you in being balanced. Emotional healing is going to support you in showing up in your pregnancy, being hopeful and joyful, being able to hold all the things, to hold the love for the baby that isn't here with you right now, that isn't physically here, and also holding the joy for the baby that's planning to join you, for the baby that's going to be here with you, and knowing without a doubt that that baby's here with you. Because there's a difference in how you show up when you wonder whether or not you're going to take home your baby. There's a level of disengagement and detachment and fear and holding back your love when you wonder whether or not your baby is going to stay here. And when you just know that this baby is going to be here with me, when you just allow yourself to love completely, right? And so my work is to support you in getting to the next stage, wherever you are, whether it's working on your healing, whether it's putting together a plan so that you can be ready for your next pregnancy, whether you're pregnant now and want to have the support and want to have someone who has your back and want to be able to navigate anything that happens. That is my work. Okay. So I've included my link in the calendar. Definitely book a call. This week I've had a lot of calls booked, and I just get the sense that people are starting to take more action. So if you feel moved to take action, if you feel like you want some next steps, if you want us to talk about what's happening within your experience specifically, then definitely grab some time and we can work through that. Okay. So know that I'm here for you. I'm on Instagram. A lot of you are on the Birth Warriors Instagram page as well. So thank you all and have a wonderful, wonderful night. So if you need support, if you're having a tough day, if you need help working through something and creating a strategy around something, reach out to me. Like, this is why I'm here. This is the work that I do. This is the work that I am passionate about. Okay. So thank you all. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. And know that I love and appreciate you so much. Know that you are so freaking strong to be on this journey. Like, people don't even know what it takes to go through loss and to be standing. They don't know. They do not know. So you are so strong. This is why you're a birth warrior. This is why you're a birth warrior, and I'm here to support you.